If you will, imagine a scenario with me. If you would go so far as to put yourself in the midst of this scenario. Tonight, you go over to somebody's house to watch the Super Bowl. You're leaving at halftime. Right? You ate all the dip. You laughed at all the commercials. You rooted on Taylor's boyfriend. You've even seen the halftime show. There's really nothing left, so you nudge the people you're with. Hey, you ready to go? Yeah, why don't we go ahead and go? In the car on the way home, what do you say about the people you were just around? You got like 15 minutes to get back to the house. In those 15 minutes, how do you talk about the people you just spent the evening with? Are you critical? Complimentary? Condemning? What categorizes your conversation? And that kind of, it's just us moment. Here's where Jesus' final sentences of this passage hit home, right? He says, as he wraps it up in verse 37, "For by your words tonight in the car on the way home, you will be justified, and by your words you will be condemned." I mean, it really kind of settles in. I'm hopeful that it will settle in very forcefully for us. For a couple reasons. Jesus is telling us two things. If you want to see who you truly are, you're willing to take that look, then listen. If you want to see lasting change in your life, you need to exchange treasure. So he says, if you want to see who you really are, start listening. And if when you listen, you think, man, there's some things I really think should change, you have to exchange treasure. So to see how Jesus kind of puts all of this together, he makes initially a psychological analysis. He says your speech puts a microscope on your soul. Your speech allows you to see what's really deep down inside. Then he says, in particular, careless speech. And we start to make this shift, and he says, ultimately what you'll find out underneath the surface is it's about what you treasure. So we cycle back to his commands as we make our way through. Make the tree good, make the fruit good. So we're going to walk through in that same fashion. Look at the speech under a microscope. Careless speech, ultimately leading us to treasure, and two final commands. Make the tree good, make the fruit good. So your speech is the microscope to your soul. Really is a psychological identification that I think modern psychologists ignore. Every now and then it's come up, as we'll see in a moment. This was Freud's premise. Freud hinged a lot of his analysis on human psychology based upon your speech. So I think every now and then, even our world can see what Jesus is describing is absolutely accurate. But Jesus defines kind of this baseline. You ready? Here's the baseline for understanding yourself. You are what you say. What do you think? You are what you eat. I'm a potato chip. Jesus is saying something entirely different. It's not that you are what you eat. You are what you say. His way of phrasing it is this: a tree is known by its fruits. So fruit, kind of our first vocab word, you might say, in this passage. If that's a new idea to you. Your fruit is your behavior or your speech. Matthew chapter 7 described fruit as your behavior, things you do. In this passage, clearly he's connecting fruit with the things you say. So he says, therefore, a tree is known by what it says. A second kind of vocab word we get to real quickly is heart. He says, what you say comes out of the abundance of the heart. Right out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Heart is real simple, straightforward. It's a concept I think we're kind of familiar with. Your heart is who you truly are. The reason I would say we're familiar with that, even if we don't have a biblical background, we often say it's what's on the inside that counts. Well, that's the idea. Your heart is who you truly are. We might realize that it runs synonymously with soul at times, biblically. It's who I really am. My true identity is my heart. So heart is who you most fundamentally are. So out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Again, pretty simple concept, very straightforward, even though it gets overlooked. What it literally says is abundance is a good reference. It literally says what the heart is filled to overflowing with. Comes out as your words. Here's why I say this is so simple. What comes out of who you are, if you're a box, what comes out of the box is what was in the box. Right? We like to think, well, my box might be full of all this other stuff, but I'm really something over here. No, what's in the box is what you're going to pull out of the box. Right? What's in you is really what will ultimately spill out. So Jesus is saying, if your heart's filled with Christ, it will overflow with faithful, Christ-exalting words marked by truth and love. If your heart is rotten, if the roots are failing, the tree will spill out ugly, hateful, crude words. So Jesus is explaining what's in you is what comes out. He's also going to say it works the other way. What you see on the outside is revealing of what's within. And that's where he comes to this last idea. By your words, you will be justified. By your words, you will be condemned. Well, we might say, well, I thought it was what's on the inside that counts. To which he would say, exactly. Your words are revealing what's on the inside. So by those words, I think Leon Morris phrases it well. He says, what Jesus is saying is that at the judgment, what we are is what matters. And that our words reveal what we are. What you say to others says more about you than it does them. That's the idea. Real quick. What you say to others says more about you in the truest, deepest sense than it does them. Jesus' analysis, we've got to understand how this dynamic works, how he's viewing tree-fruit relationships and what it reveals. So I think it's helpful just to, although it might be old hat, to realize we don't always operate this way. Sometimes we catch ourselves, we've said something hateful, we've been rude, we realize that I was snappy with my kids, on down the list. Here's where you know whether or not you believe the fruit tree analysis. What do you blame when you've said something you wish you hadn't? What do you blame? Do I blame, well, I wouldn't have said those things, but you just push my buttons? Do I blame, listen, I'm sorry I reacted the way I did. It's just been a stressful week. What do you blame? You say, yeah, you may not have appreciated how I talked to them. You go grocery shopping with 4 kids. Let's see how you talk. Right? So what we're saying is, I don't believe the analysis Jesus just gave. That's what we're saying. The bad fruit you saw came from something outside of me, not from within me. Jesus is blaming the heart. So while you might be quick to say, oh yeah, I've heard this idea before, it's what's on the inside that counts, and etc. Do you believe it? That's where I think he's really hitting home. So now he's going to do something. He's going to really turn the microscope in for just a second in a single category. If you noticed, he said, verse 36, on Judgment Day, people will give account for every careless word. So some people have pushed this aside, this kind of careless speech category, to mean God's going to judge even the minutia of your life. I don't think that's right. I think careless word is intentional. It would be weird for him to give a throwaway phrase when he's saying every word matters. So I think we should say every word matters. So what is this category of careless speech? I don't want us to miss it. I think the way we miss it is we think it's when speech was frivolous or accidental. I had a lady I was working with at church a number of years ago named Beverly. I was really hoping Beverly could do something for me. I was on my way out of the church, and so I texted her real quick. And I said, hey, Beverly, when you get a moment, please give me a call. My Apple phone hates me. So when I hit send, it changes my words, like every other time. So what I sent this lady at church in a professional work environment is, hey, baby, call me when you can. To which she did not respond. It was weird. I thought, why is she calling me? She hadn't called me. Finally, another lady at church calls me up and says, Mitch, I think the way you have begun to speak to people is too familiar. I thought, man, that was generous. And so I thought, what are you talking about? I looked back at baby. So that's not the idea with careless words. It's not just, oops, this was a mistake, and one day I'm going to pay for all my mistakes. Right? I shouldn't have said that. It was a little off color or whatever else. And one day my feet are going to be held to the fire. That's not what he's saying. This is not threatening you about every minute little word. That doesn't make sense in the passage. What are you going to be judged on? Your heart. What is he saying careless words do? Reveal your heart. That's the whole concept here. So it's not about, man, you better clamp down and watch every little word. That doesn't make any sense. What he's saying is, you want to see what your heart is all about? What God will judge one day? Look at your careless words. So let's put careless as a category, if you will, just real quickly. What's the opposite of careless? Careful. Right? There are times when you are very careful about your words. You're very calculating about your words. Those don't reveal who you truly are as much as the times when you're not careful, when you let your guard down, when you speak your mind. Now he's saying this is revealing. So sometimes, I referenced Freud earlier, I think there's a helpfulness here. The connection is, there are times we accidentally let something slip that we really did mean. For a moment, our guard came down, we were not as careful, and I said something. We don't usually call it Freudian slip. Usually we say that was a slip of the tongue. But when it happens, and it's true, we follow it up with something like, well, I guess you know what I really think. For just a split second, your guard came down. And you said what was really on your heart. So where else in life does your guard come down? Where else? Behind closed doors? Shut the door? Talk a little lower? And it's incredibly revealing to the point we don't want it shared. Right? Parents of little kids know this well. Your 4-year-old repeats everything. And so when you said on the phone to your sister, the only reason she dresses like that is because she's trying to get every other husband's attention. Then you showed up at dinner and your 4-year-old, my mom says the only reason you dress like that, right? And you're mortified because you just got exposed. But do you see that's how it's working? When I let my guard down, I'm not so careful, I'm careless with my words, it's showing what's really there. We know this in an entirely different sphere, but maybe a more obvious way. It's alcohol. The next day, you say, hey, last night, I think I kind of talked too much and I said some things that I probably wouldn't say. It really wasn't me talking. That's just the way I am after a few drinks. We know what happened, right? The alcohol brought the filters down. And I said what's really there. Anger and anxiety work the same way. You get angry and you let some things fly. Then you come back later embarrassed. And you think, listen, you're just going to have to forgive me. There's just a lot going on. If Jesus' words are accurate, what he's saying is you stopped being careful because of the circumstances of life, and what you said reveals what's really there. We do this with select audiences. Sometimes there's some people we know what we can get away with. You talk about the people coming across the southern border in terms that sound kind of racist. And it shows what's really there. Maybe you're by yourself. As you walk out of the room, you mumble under your breath. You don't really want anybody to hear it, but it's there. So if we use Jesus' logic, right? Because he's talking about this primarily in a negative way. You brood of vipers is not a real positive sense. He's critiquing negative speech. Here's his logic. Our words reveal what is in our heart, especially words spoken when our guard is down. Let me pause real fast, because I've gone down this road just enough before I've had an experience. Some of you in the room have had very hurtful things said to you, and you've excused it. You say, well, I know they were just mad, etc. Follow the logic. What they were saying is not speaking about you. They're not accurate about you. What would be accurate about you? What you say. So hopefully you see it for what it is. Those ugly things they said are speaking about something ugly in them. So you're reflecting back on that parent who was mad and said all those things, and you've held on to it for a long time. I would say, see it for what it is. So to this point, Jesus has said, your heart is who you truly are. Your words reveal your heart, especially words that are careless. So we think, man, there's a lot kind of going on under the surface. What's going on in my heart? So here's why I think this is particularly helpful. Jesus is going to diagnose what goes on under the surface. In this passage, he's doing it in a very short, kind of pithy way, but he's diagnosing it. So verse 35, if you'll look back at that one verse with me, he gives this phrase, this diagnosis phrase. The good person out of his good treasure brings forth good, and the evil person out of his evil treasure brings forth evil. So we're to this treasure idea. So again, let me recap what he said. Let's kind of map it out. He said, your heart is who you truly are as a person. Your careless speech should reveal that to you for good or bad. Now he's building on that, and he says, everyone treasures something. Everyone treasures something. Your treasure controls your heart, and your heart controls your speech. Let me run through it again. Everyone treasures something. Your treasure controls your heart controls your speech. So here's where I think this is very, very, very helpful and is a great break, possibly for some of you, from the church environment you grew up in. If you grew up in a church environment that you view as legalistic, occasionally I get that, often in the Southeast you get that. Usually what I find as you kind of unravel things, what they mean by that is they were told to clean up their life. But they were told that apart from inner transformation. Jesus is saying the opposite. He's saying the thing you want to clean up shows you need inner transformation. And in particular, you need a different treasure. So, if you treasure Christ, for instance, that moment tonight, driving home, is filled with truth and love, according to Ephesians 4:15. If you treasure yourself, then that moment tonight, driving home, will disparage others so that you look a little better. Ezekiel 14:3, I think, has a helpful phrase in this line of what we treasure. So he talks about how people put things in their heart. He says this, these men have taken their idols into their hearts. Have you ever pictured an idol? I always picture the same thing. If somebody says an idol, I know they're all different shapes and sizes, but what I've always pictured is kind of a real chubby man sitting cross-legged, and you put him up on your windowsill or something. So he doesn't literally mean that they found a way to surgically stick a chubby cross-legged man inside of their chest cavity, right? Obviously. So we have to say, what does he mean that they took their treasure into their heart? I think Paul Tripp is helpful. He says this, Whatever rules our heart will exercise inescapable influence over our lives and behavior. So if Christ rules my heart, he will exercise inescapable influence. But when the fruit is bad, it's showing me something else rules my heart. So, say you really wanted the promotion at work. You've been longing for it, working diligently to kind of check all the boxes. Someone, admittedly, more qualified, got the promotion. What do you do with your words? All day at work, you're careful. You're careful all day at work. You say all the right things. Congratulations. I know they picked the right man for the job. Yes, I was very interested in the job, but I can't imagine anybody doing a better job than her. When we say all the right things, we're careful. The moment we get home, it's unleashed. It is unleashed. How ridiculous it is, how they strung you along, how you were always the person. And then here at the last minute to get the rug snatched out from under you for somebody who's half the person you are, right? It gets unleashed. What that means in that moment is your treasure got exposed. You've been longing for the recognition, longing for somebody to actually appreciate your work more than you've been longing for Christ. So, Jesus gives two admonitions, if that's the case. First, he says, make the tree good. If your speech in careless moments hangs there like rotting fruit, it's a bad tree. So he started out with a command. Either make the tree good. So how do we make the tree good? In some sense, for a believer and somebody who's not a believer, it starts at a very similar place. A recognition that I've treasured something wrong and I need to turn away from that. But there is a deviation at that point. If you can process this passage up to this point and you're really honest and you would say, there has never been a way in which my speech has revealed I follow Christ. I treasure Christ. That's never been the case. I think be very honest. My hope, my prayer is that you would be very, very honest and not fool ourselves. Say, I do need to be a new tree. I need this tree somewhere deep inside of me transformed so that this good fruit does come out. If you have a longing for that, do you see how transformative this metaphor is? The metaphor is saying, from the depths of your roots all the way up to the last little twig, you need transformation. The Bible is talking about this is so involved, and it is such a radical redoing that it's being born all over again, is the way Jesus describes it. Like a rebirth. It's gotten the nickname, reborn. Here's how it happens. If that's you, here's how it happens. You admit there's other things I have treasured and I have not treasured Jesus. As you start by saying, God, I want to turn away from all those things I've treasured. I've put a lot of things in my heart, and I want to turn away from all of them, and I want to turn to your Son and treasure him alone. And here's the beauty of it, is when we make that exchange, remember what verse 37 said? You'll be condemned for all the things you say. Jesus is the one who's condemned for you. All the things you feel like I'm going to have to answer for one day, he's willing to be condemned for you. When you turn away from everything else you've treasured and you say, I want to treasure him, and he is condemned for you in your place, and then you get life with him, which is the riches of actual treasure. That's to be made new, born again, a new tree at the very depths of your soul. Believers, this side of heaven produce mixed fruit. This side of heaven, we produce mixed fruit. Right? There's times where none of us are going to produce perfect fruit. Where I see bad fruit, according to Jesus' analysis, it's indicating I do not treasure Christ in that area of my life. So I need to make this treasure exchange. I think an easy way to think about it is work backwards. If you say, okay, in that moment that came to mind when I had careless words, my guard was down, and I said things, if I treasured Christ, what would I have said? What would truth and love look like in that moment, behind closed doors, with my select group of people? So I'm saying, how should I, in this sphere of life, in this limb that goes out, see good fruit because I've treasured Christ? There's a sense in which I make the fruit good by exchanging treasure. So he is presenting, not in every way you could do this. He's saying this is the analytical tool by where you figure out what needs to be addressed. The mistake today, if I can get every believer in the room for just a second. The mistake is when you leave here, you think, man, I'm going to start really watching what I say. That's the mistake. We haven't heard Jesus well. It's not leave here and really watch what I say. That's based on willpower. And willpower is like stapling a good apple to a bad tree. Your willpower is going to rot in a matter of days. Right? So it's not leave here and really watch what everything I say. It's, man, this is showing me what's on the inside. God, I need to exchange treasure. It's exposing something. So what I need is a treasure exchange. From that, yes, my words change, but I've got to have a treasure exchange. I find consistently Christians read this passages and other ones, and they clean up their language. You really clean it up around pastors. I know most of you don't get this experience, Lord willing, but there are people. You can envision what it would be like. They have a funny joke. I've even had people change the joke midstream to me because they realize the punch word is not a polite word. And so to get the punchline just right, they just kind of stumble through it. And I thought that was a boring joke at first. I thought, it clicks with me. And so I've always wondered why you got to clean up the speech around me. Maybe somebody could tell me at some point in time. Are you worried I'm going to tattle to God? Or are you worried I'm a snowflake and I can't handle it? I don't know. One of the two. So if we walk away and that's our approach, is I need to clean it all up. It's based on your willpower, not God's work in your life. You need to say, and I have treasured something. This has exposed something down in me. What does it look like to stop treasuring whatever it is and start treasuring Christ in that area? That's the process. Parents, grandparents, you've got to do this in your kids. When you hear language you don't like, if your response is, "No, sir, we don't talk like that," you're just telling them, get your language together based on willpower. Do you see what their language has told you? In their soul, they've got something they are treasuring that has nothing to do with Jesus. If you're not addressing it, I'll be real frank, biblically, you're not parenting. You're not grandparenting. So we rightly perceive what Jesus is saying through this passage. I think where he lands with us is where he started. Some hear the admonition out of the gate. Make the tree good by coming to Christ. He transforms you from the inside out. It's the true opportunity to produce good fruit. Believers, please don't run from it. Please don't assume. Yeah, I'll say some things here or there. He's saying this is how transformation happens in your life. Is an exchange of treasure. So if you just ignore your words, give them a pass, you're not progressing towards Jesus. This is the revealing, illuminating item. What does it say? If this morning you're thinking through that, you might need more dialogue in other ways. I would encourage you to talk through it with other folks, other believers. I'm certainly available. And especially if you're thinking, I don't think I've been a good tree ever, and I want Christ to be my treasure. I would love to discuss, what does that look like? So whether that begins doing this song with God in prayer, or you're talking to somebody later today, I think it would be a very good approach. Investigate your words. Would you please stand?